us. I appreciate you all being here. We are finishing up the fourth chapter of Kohelet tonight, fourth chapter of Ecclesiastes, and beginning of the fifth chapter. We actually started in the last session. We started this the last verse of the fourth chapter, but we did not get very far with it. So we're going to start that over from the beginning again. Let me just put the screen right over here. Okay, great. And let me just also place into the chat. Of course, that's our link if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous sessions or review anything. So that's there. You can find that all there at our website at portlandkollel.org/Kohelet. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. As I mentioned before, we're short on time. I unfortunately had to push off, make the starting a little later than I usually like to. So that's where we are. Hopefully we'll get to a more normal schedule in the coming weeks. So again, without any further ado, let me jump into the screen share. And okay, if everyone can see that. Let me set my screen properly, and here we go. So this is the 17th, verse 17, chapter 4, verse 17. And as I mentioned last time, which was 2 weeks ago, if it was up to me, I would have started the new chapter already with this verse. I don't think it really belongs in the last chapter, but again, it's a fight between me and those Christian monks. So I guess we're kind of stuck with the system that they gave us because we just like it so much. But if it was up to me, I would really start the fifth chapter over here. It does play off of the same theme as the last chapter. And the last chapter was, again, we had a couple different cases of people who struggle to find balance in their life. So because they struggle to find balance, they either are overly controlling, or the opposite is that they give up too much control. They give up too quickly. They're too idealistic or too perfectionistic to allow themselves to even try and fail. So here we came out saying that there's some sort of level of balance that we're supposed to try to achieve. And that's what we're going to be finding now in the coming chapter, is talking about finding balance, particularly in the area of holiness. When a person's striving for holiness, your natural tendency would be, or the person's, you could potentially make the calculation that any holiness is good holiness, and I should try to strive for the most and reach for the top right away. He's going to tell us that that's not exactly the appropriate approach when trying to achieve holiness. So that's verse number 17 over here. Let's get into it. And he says like this: Shemor raglecha, watch your foot, literally your foot. As you notice over here, there's one of those what we call kri ketiv. It's written one way and read a different way. So in the version in the scroll, it'll be written with that extra letter yud there, which will make it into a plural. We read it as a singular. Shemor raglecha, watch your foot. Watch your foot. Ka'asher telech el beita elokim, as you walk to the house of God. So watch your foot when you go to the house of God. The karov lishmoa, come close for listening. Miteit hakasilim zavach, the fools give sacrifices. Ki einam yodeim la'asot ra, because they do not know how to do bad. Now, that's a kind of funny sentence over there. Let's read it all together once again, and then we'll explain it piece by piece. Shemor raglecha kasher telech el beita elokim. Again, watch your foot as you go to the house of God. The karov lishmoa, the closeness or come close in order to listen. Miteit hakasilim zavach, the fools give sacrifices. Ki einam yodeim la'asot ra, because or however they do not know what it means to do bad. So there's a number of points over here that I want to just jump into right away. First of all, I think that he's going to be talking about the house of God. I think that's an example of your apex, your zenith of holiness. What's the holiest thing you could think of? House of God, right? That would be the holiest place we could think of. So he's jumping to the extreme example of a person trying to achieve holiness. In fact, the house of God is probably a very good example anyway, because it's a tangible experience. A person can go, when we had a temple, a person was able to go to the temple and actually have some sort of holy experience, which is actually pretty physical. But you could experience holiness in some level of a tangible way. So he says, however, when you do that, watch your foot. Watch your foot when you do that. The rabbis, the sages learn from here actually that they use this as a source. They teach us a number of halachot, a number of laws that we have to be careful of, not to run when you're in the temple or run in shul, not to walk through the temple with your shoes on. You actually have to go barefoot through the temple, a number of other things like that, particularly around the laws of prayer. So it says, be careful with the laws of prayer. We're going to see more about that at the beginning of the next chapter, the care that we take in the laws of prayer. But what he does say over here is, when you go to the house of God, again, whether that be the temple or the synagogue or anything like that, you want to watch your foot. As we did earlier with this, where he makes a plural into where he writes it as a plural, I read it as a singular. I think there's a hidden message there too. Don't run with both feet. You want to dip your toes in. Even when you do go, when you do go, you're going to want to dip your toe in, your one foot. Watch that one foot when you go into the house of God. Don't even go in with both feet. Be thoughtful when approaching the house of God. And there's an obvious idea over there, which is we're talking about a matter of extreme holiness. We're talking about a matter of a tangible experience of holiness. Don't jump in with both feet. Don't not go, but also be careful when you go. Have the right mindset when you go to the house of God. And that's what he says over here. This next line is the karov lishmoa. Your coming close should be with a purpose. It should be with a purpose of listening. Don't go ready for action. Go ready to listen. When you're going to the house of God, when you're going into a holy and a spiritual experience, you want to go with the intention to listen, to learn, instead of action. Because who does action? That's the next line. Mitei takasilim zavach. It is the fools. And now we're starting to see fools come up much more often. It's the act of fools to immediately come bringing sacrifices. Now, that's a strange thing to say. I'm going to be honest, because the Torah gives us many reasons to bring sacrifices. Some people have an obligation to bring sacrifice. Every person, when the holidays come around, has obligations to bring sacrifices. If a person does a sin, certain types of sins, they have an obligation to bring a sacrifices. So it seems to be painting with a pretty broad brush to say that the fools give the gift of a sacrifice. Mitate over here, the shoresh, the root of that is matana, is a gift. So it is the gift of fools. Sacrifices are the gift of fools. But I think he's saying that it's what your intention when you walk in the door. If your intention is just there to, I have to jump in, do my action and everything like that, then you're probably not in the right mindset. Because why is it foolish to bring it why is it the fool's gift to bring a sacrifice? Because, and he qualifies that with this last line over here, Ki einam yodim la'asot ra. If a person brings a sacrifice, but they don't actually know what they did wrong, if they do not, because they do not know what it means to do ra, to do the wrong, what does it mean to do wrong, then you're already, I would say you're already in the wrong mindset. You have to come, obviously a person may have an obligation to bring a sacrifice, and whatever that corresponding thing would be nowadays without a temple. But obviously a person has an obligation to do that, but perhaps a bigger obligation that person has is to learn what is right, what is wrong. Why am I bringing the sacrifice? And that's, again, the coming with the intention to listen. You should be coming with the intention to listen rather than coming with the intention to act. You may have an obligation to act also, but your intention should be to listen as opposed to act. Right? First, learn what it means to do ra. What does it mean to do that which is evil, to do what is right and what is wrong? And then you can start talking about action in the form of sacrifices. So I believe that's the first lesson. And it's kind of an intro to this next chapter. Again, if it was up to me, I would have put this in the next chapter anyway. I think this is a much better starting point than an ending point. So again, watch your foot. Go with 1 foot only. Watch that 1 foot as you go to the house of God. Come close to listen with the intention to listen. It is the fool who automatically gives the gift of a sacrifice and doesn't even bother to figure out what does it mean to do right and wrong. And again, that's an important piece that we're going to be focusing on in our in our discussion. Okay, what is right and wrong? And as we've already seen now, he's already called 2 or potentially 3 things he's titled as Tov. So we're going to see more of those as we go throughout the rest of the book, that he tells us what is good as opposed to bad. Okay, in the same vein, we move on to the next verse, and it's very similar, but it is different, and I think this actually starts to move into something that's a little more close to home. We don't have a house of God in the sense of the temple. We do have a house of God in the sense of the synagogue. We do have prayer. Okay, so now let's translate this last lesson into a lesson about prayer. And that's what he says over here. Let's read the verse all at once. Al tavahel al picha, do not be rushed with your mouth. Okay, to vahel basically means confused or chaotic. So do not be chaotic with your mouth. V'libcha al yemaher, and your heart you should not rush. Lahotzi davar lifnei ha'elokim, to put out a word before God. Ki ha'elokim b'shamayim, because God is in heaven. Va'ata al ha'aretz, and you are on the ground. Al kain yihyu devarecha me'atim. Therefore, your words should be, you should have less words. You should minimize the amount of words. So your words should be minimal. Okay, that's the word I was looking for. Let me read that all together once again. Al tavahel al picha, do not rush, do not be chaotic with your mouth. V'libcha al yimaher lahotzi davar lifnei elokim, and do not hurry your heart to put forth words or a word before God. Ki ha'elokim b'shamayim, because God is in heaven. Va'ata al ha'aretz, and you are on the ground. Al kain, therefore, yihyu devarecha ma'atim, you should minimize your words. Therefore, your words should be minimal. Okay. And so there's a number of things over here which we're starting to see, which is again translating that last idea, that purely spiritual experience of running into the temple. Don't run into the temple, right? You want to be careful when you're approaching holiness. You have to do it with care, with consideration. So same thing over here. When we're talking about prayer, speaking to God, right? When speaking to putting forth words before God, do not be chaotic. Do not rush yourself, because that's the inappropriate way to speak to God. Now, there's 2 points over there, I would say. In fact, if you look at most of the commentaries over here, what you'll find is that they understand this is talking about don't blame God for your problems. That is definitely a way, again, nearly, not everybody, but a large percentage of the commentaries understand that that's what we're discussing over here. This in the next verse also is that we're talking about people who complain against God. I don't want to go in that direction. I think the way we're understanding it actually fits a little better if we're just talking about prayer in general, right? So do not rush yourself in prayer. Don't put forth words that you haven't thought through. Obviously, we have a text of prayer. That's a little different story. And in fact, it's worth seeing. I'm actually going to jump to another screen here for a second and just show you a quick. This is a idea brought down in the Gemara and the Talmud in Brachot. The story goes, I hope you could see this, that there was a person who went down. He went to lead the prayers in front of a great rabbi by the name of Rabbi Hanina. Not Rabbi Hanina was not leading the prayers. Another person was leading the prayers. And at the first blessing of the Amidah prayer, we say the words Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora, right? The God who is great and mighty and awesome. But this person got up and said, the God who is great, mighty, awesome, powerful, mighty, awe-inspiring, strong, fearless, steadfast, and honor. Right? In Hebrew, Adir, Izuz, Yarui, Chazak, Amit, Vadai, and Nechbad. right? So he went on and added a whole bunch of words to the prayer, saying that God is all these other things too. So the story goes that Rabbi Hanina waited until the person finished the prayers, and after he finished, he came over to me and said, "I have a question for you. Have you said all the praises of your master? Have you said all the praises of God?" No, you obviously didn't, because you can never end. There's no end to God's praises. So for you to go ahead and give us all these superfluous praises, that's inappropriate. And instead, we choose those specific words. Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora. We choose those words. God, who is great, mighty, and awesome. We stop there because that's where Moses stopped. When Moses praised God, he used those 4 terms. We stop there too. Okay, and there were different periods of time that we use these different prayers, different terms. But at the end of the day, Moses gave us these 4. We stick to those 4. The more you add, the more you end up losing also, because once you start praising God, you could really never end. So therefore, you have to be a little more careful. Don't jump to the next step. You want to be careful and not add too much. And that's the same thing I think that Kohelet is telling us over here, is you don't want to just throw words out of your mouth when you're talking to God. You want to be careful and have consideration with what you're saying, because, and that's really the next point over here, is Ki ha'elokim b'shamayim. God's in heaven, v'atal ha'aretz. You are on the ground. So what you perceive as being a good thing, you may be only perceiving a praise of God because you're over here. But if you had a vantage point over here, you'd realize that what you're saying is actually not that respectful. It's actually a lower praise than you think it is. That may actually be worse off what you're saying. So actually, in that same piece of the Talmud over there, it says, imagine you had a king who had millions and millions of gold coins, and you said, well, that king is so great, he's got 10,000 silver talents. The guy's got millions of gold coins, and you mentioned 10,000 silver talents because you're over here, right? But if you were over here and you were on a higher vantage point, you'd have a greater understanding of what you're saying is maybe not as great as you think it is. So be very careful, particularly when adding to the text of the prayer. If you're adding things, you want to be very careful with what you say, particularly in the realm of praising God. We have a script because it's a really good script, and it doesn't really need that much improvement. To which he ends off that, he caps that with saying, Al kain yehu devarecha ma'atim. Therefore, you want to actually have less words. You want to minimize your words before God. You want to be careful with what you say. The rabbis tell us elsewhere that it is better to pray a little bit with concentration than to pray a lot without concentration, right? You want to have a little prayer that's done properly is much better than a lot of prayer that's just not done well. The way I was taught it also is that it's better to have a little prayer without concentration than a lot of prayer without concentration. Kind of a play on the idea is, if you're not going to be concentrating anyway, then you really want to be very careful with what you with how much you're saying. And I would say that's probably if you're let's say in my case, so I try to pray 3 times a day. You end up having a lot of prayers that don't necessarily have concentration. So anyway, we want to be very careful with what we bring into the prayer service. And I think he gives a great little visualization for this in this next verse over here, verse number 2. So again, this is chapter 5, verse number 2. And he says, Ki baha chalom berov inyan. Dreams come with a lot of weird things. Inyan is frivolity, we've seen this idea come, inyan being uselessness. So dreams come with a lot of uselessness. And the kol kasil, and the voice of a fool, berov dvarim, comes with lots of words. So he makes a correlation over here. Again, ki baha chalom berov inyan. Dreams come with a lot of uselessness. The kol kasil berov dvarim, the voice of a fool, comes with a lot of words. So I think that what he's saying over here is he's making this comparison here between dreams and the amount of kind of crazy things that happen in a dream, and also the amount of things that come out of our mouths. And I think there's a very, very interesting thought that he's bringing up over here. Dreams, I always find dreams fascinating. First of all, because I get a lot of dreams, and I also I find them to be very revealing about ourselves. Now, you will dream. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak about anybody else's dreams, but I can say my dreams. I have a lot of things that I do in a dream that I wouldn't necessarily do in real life. Dreams, I don't think it's necessarily a reflection of your actions or what you would do, but I think that dreams definitely show a little bit about what's going through your head. Whether it's a minute thing that you just thought about for a second, somehow ends up in a dream. Somebody you haven't thought about in a while and just you thought of for a second, and that night they end up in your dream. Or if it's something that's heavy on your head, it's very likely for a person to show up in a person's dream. So I think what dreams do reveal, they don't necessarily reveal what we would do in a given situation, but they definitely reveal to us what we're thinking about, what's going through our heads, what ends up taking space in our brains. In that sense, a dream really is its own kind of it's more than just a window into the soul. It's a lesson about who we are, and it shows you who you are. So in that sense, and even though there's a lot of inyan, there's a lot of kind of fluff that ends up in a dream, all that fluff came from somewhere. It came from the fact that you have things in your head. In the same way, you have the voice of the fool. And the voice of the fool also has a lot of fluff in it, but not necessarily much. Sorry, let me take that a step back. The voice of the fool has a mixture, just like a dream would have a mixture of what's important to you and kind of other side things that go through your brain. The voice of the fool also has that mixture of things. It's got a lot of important things to the fool. It's got a lot of other kind of fluff that goes through the fool's head. So in that sense, they're very similar in that way. They're this mixture of the important and the non-important. But what they both do is that they reveal what's going on inside the person's head, even if it's less important, but it's still something going on in the person's head. I think that where do you get a sense of this? We're talking about the voice of somebody who's unguarded. When a person is not guarded with what they're saying, which we all do sometimes, whether it's because we're in the middle of an argument or whether it's how we always speak, we're just unguarded, whether somebody catches us off guard, literally. But what comes out of our mouth when we are unguarded, that shows you a little bit more about who you are inside. The rabbis point out to us that a person you can tell who a person is based on how they act. Bekoso, bekiso, bakaso is how the Gemara puts it. 3 words that sound very similar. How they act when they drink, how they act when money is involved, and how they act or speak when they're angry. So those 3 are ways that you can really, that's when you really get a sense of who a person is. How do they act when they're totally unguarded for any one of those reasons? That's what comes out of their mouth then. That's a lot more, that's going to tell you a lot more about who that person really is. So in the context of what we're talking about, you have a person who wants to jump into it and say this person's ready, is jumping into the house of God because they're ready for that spiritual experience, or they're running to prayer and they're just letting the words fall out of their mouth in prayer because they're just running into it. While we might think that that's the appropriate course of action because it's holiness, spirituality, do whatever you can. In reality, he's telling us, learn a little bit more about yourself first, because who are you? Look at when you have kol kasil, when you have the foolish voice. I mean, when you let yourself let go, what comes out of your mouth, that's where you're going to start to see who you really are. And maybe there's something to work on first before changing your lifestyle, before running in with 2 feet into the house of God. Perhaps there's some more work to do before you do that. Not to say a person shouldn't come to the house of God, not to say a person should involve themselves in prayer, but when doing so, you really want to be considerate, have a high level of consideration about who you are, bring yourself to the temple or to the synagogue, understand who you are, and then start to take steps of action towards growth. But you don't want to just jump into feet first, because that's not a balanced approach. So balance, again, our goal here is to find balance. Again, our super goal, our supreme goal is to find happiness. So one of the ways to get to happiness, or perhaps the most essential key to happiness, is going to be balance, and this is where we're going to be finding it in the pursuit of holiness, of spirituality. How do you approach that? Okay, I was hoping to get to 2 more verses today, but we ran out of time. So we will see this theme is going to continue going in the next couple verses, and we will pick up next week. I'm going to stop the share, and now we're all back here. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep an eye out for what time we'll do next week. I'm hoping to move back to a more normal time as we go, but the summer months do get a little difficult. I hope everyone had a great Passover, and I will see you next week.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining us.
I just really appreciate what you said about if you're going to not pay attention while you're praying, then keep it brief.
Yes.
I just really like that. Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Rabbi, just a real quick question.
Sure.
I won't take up a lot of your time. I appreciated your explanation about foot versus feet, but what I don't understand is, since has the plural, why the commentary or the commentators decided that they wanted it to be the idea of foot instead of feet, a concept of foot instead of feet.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yeah. So I don't think this is necessarily a move by the commentators. What we understand typically is when you have something that's read one way and written a different way, it means that the author himself wrote it like that, whether it's to make a point, which I think is the idea over here, meaning he wrote it one way, but in the tradition it's brought that you read it a different way, meaning there was a thought to perhaps read it the other way, but he's even telling you a lesson, don't even read it that way that I wrote it, if that makes sense. No.
How could you know what was in the mind of somebody from centuries ago? I don't quite understand. I'm not arguing with you. I just
Sure.
don't get it.
Oh,
Sure. Yeah. I'd have to probably put a little more thought into it before I answer your question. But
Well, if there was an oral tradition from which the scribes wrote, so that goes back way back. So there's continuity of that oral tradition, perhaps.
right. Yeah. I mean this is definitely the case. The case definitely is King Solomon wrote it one way with the intention of you reading it a different way. That's clear. We did not go ahead and change the writing at any point. He specifically wrote it one way and had it read a different way. Now, why he did that, that's just, I'm giving my own take on it, my own spin on that. He doesn't tell us why that is necessarily.
I'm going to let you go in a moment. I don't understand how anybody would know that he meant it to be done a different way. How would anybody know?
So we're a religion of a lot of oral tradition. So we've got this. I mean, it's all throughout the Tanakh. Is tons and tons of places where words are written one way and read a different way, and it's ubiquitous. All Jews write it the same way and read it a different way. It's just thousands of years of tradition that somehow existed. It kept going. I don't quite know how that happens, honestly. I'll be honest with you.
I appreciate that acknowledgement, because I don't get it either. But yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you. I won't take up any more.
And thank you for joining us again. We missed you for a couple of weeks, so glad to see you again.
I had it on my desk calendar, and I got busy doing Facebook or whatever, and I said, "Oh no!" It slipped my mind.
Oh,
and then
okay.
last week you didn't have it, right?
That's correct.
Because
Yeah.
I tried, but I realized it didn't happen. Oh yeah, okay. That's what happens. Sometimes I get into something else, and time just goes. but thank you for acknowledging me. I really, really like this class. You're really a good teacher, and the topic is fascinating. I've never